Welcome, everybody, to today's edition of Böll.Global. We're dealing today with Syria again, which we did many times in the past. And today's topic is One Syria for All, Civil Rights as Guarantees for Minority Rights. And I think it is a very relevant topic for which I'm really happy to have excellent speakers with me today. We thought, well, we at least watched really intensely and were glued to the televisions in 2011 when the Syrian revolution started, and we followed it through all the darkness of the years and years of war. So December, in the beginning of December, we were on the one hand excited, all along with our Syrian partners, seeing that 54 years of a terrible dictatorship ended. But I think for us, it was also, like for many of our partners, a moment in which we were not only optimistic. We thought that it is a moment in which so many things can go wrong. And of course, seeing that HTS, an Islamist group, was in the lead of the offensive, it got a lot of credit for toppling the regime, and in the end took over as a transitional government with no real perspective of when the transitional period will end, when and whether there will be democratic elections. We were all worried. So we thought, especially after the violence and the sectarian massacres that we witnessed in the beginning of March of this year, we come here to discuss how could a Syria for all look like, because this is something that I think we heard from all of our partners and from our network, that this is a desired vision, a Syria that is livable and that is just for everybody to live there. So let me introduce to you with whom we are here today. We have with us Lina Rotuka, who I would like to, well, could you possibly switch on your camera as well, Lina? So we can also see you. Lina Rotuk? Ooh. Hi, here you are. Well, Lina is a Syrian researcher and human rights specialist with 10 years of experience in the humanitarian and research sectors. She holds an MA in human rights from Saint Joseph University in Beirut, and her academic research focused on the gendered impact of enforced disappearances, a terrible dark chapter of the Syrian war in which more than 130,000 people vanished, and their fate is yet unclear. Her academic research also it entailed advocating for intersectional and victim-centered approaches to addressing human rights violations. Lina is from the ruined neighborhood of Homs City, and she has led several research projects aiming at promoting a conflict-sensitive approach to rebuilding the city and restoring its fractured social fabric. While she waits the day that she can return home after 12 years of displacement, Lina continues to advocate for justice in Homs and across Syria, justice rooted in the dignity of victims, and justice that rejects sectarian revenge and works towards accountability and non-repetition. Welcome, Lina Rotuk. Also with us is Fadi Haliso, who I have known for a long time, ever since I was in Lebanon. Fadi Haliso is an engineer from Aleppo in Syria. He is a co-founder and the CEO of the organization Basme in Zeytoune, a Syrian refugee-led organization for relief and development. And also Fadi looks back at a long history of experience in the humanitarian field in Syria and the surrounding countries. Hi, Fadi. And last but not least, I welcome Lina Omran. Lina Omran is a research assistant at Bielefeld University. She holds an MA in contemporary sociology from Leicester University in the UK and a master's in social sciences from Humboldt University in Berlin. Her research focuses on civil society in conflict areas, migration and diaspora dynamics, and previously she managed different programs working for Iraqi, Palestinian, and Syrian refugees, all of them focusing on protection, mental health, and psychosocial support. Lina also worked as a researcher and consultant with various UN agencies and international and national organizations, including GIZ, UNESCO, UNICEF, and others. Welcome, Lina. How we would like to do this conversation is that I first keep the conversation on the panel. I will go through different aspects of what we should understand and would like to understand about Syria. But of course, we also have a Q&A tool. You'll find it in the Zoom down there. I think most of you are already used to it. If you have a question or a remark, kindly put it there, and we'll try to address it during the discussion or take some time afterwards also for your questions. I'm very glad Louisa Rey, who's helping me to also keep an eye on all the comments, is central in organizing this. Thank you, Louisa. Also, thank you to Lucas and Philip, who are behind the scenes with us and who are taking care of all the technical aspects. And of course, Sarah Stachelhaus from our Beirut office, where she leads the Syria program. Without all of you, it would not have been possible. So thank you very much. I would like to start actually with what we experienced and what we saw in the beginning of March. With the violence that we saw in the coastal areas, I think many who were critical of HTS from the very beginning said, look, this is what had to happen, sectarian violence, where Islamists turn against Syria's minorities. So first, I would like to start with you, Lina Omran. In the protests over the years of revolution, we also always heard one chant, and that was Wahed, 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 where people were chanting for desired Syrian unity. And we also saw the huge celebrations all across Syria, from Latakia to Kamishli to Sweda to Damascus after the regime fell. So how do you look at the massacres that happened in the coastal areas? And could you maybe explain to us what happened and what stirred this violence?
Yeah, thank you, Bente. Thanks for hosting me, and good afternoon, everyone. So, I mean, definitely when we talk about this violence, it didn't happen suddenly. Like, I mean, there was kind of signs and it was incremental somehow. I think there is different level we can talk about it here. I mean, there is the level of authority, the level of public, but also like there is this come and interlinked also with the historical level, and they all interlinked and interact together. I mean, I'm going to talk about after the 8th of December, but I mean, we can also talk about like later on the historical process. So like the deterrence aggression operation, which like took around like 10 days, was, as said, like kind of clean victory or like white victory, like in the Syrian terms. So like was no revenge, no destruction, no clear, no dismantlation of the public institution, and it was faced by like wild relief and like happiness. In like most of the segments or like the majority of the Syrians everywhere around the country. I mean, after that, however, there was the slogan that was promoted by like the top of the leadership using like the slogan about that a victory with no revenge. And it was extensively repeated and used after that. And I think that somehow gave the impression that not taking revenge was a form of generosity, let's say, which reinforced the idea of being forgiving to somehow to a group whom we believe somehow deserve nothing but punishment, but we decide to forgive them. And somehow it built a boundary. It started to build a boundary and distinguish and start between like a group that was giving amnesty or forgiveness and like committed to somehow acts that deserve to be punished for, and the rest were kind of victims of that group. I mean, this also somehow give impression to others that there are like to lots of people that those who are committing crimes or committed crimes under the Syrian regime will not be held accountable later on. Especially that we started to see kind of process which looked very vague about what's going to come next. I mean, people, for instance, asked where like the former regime militias, but also like army was requested to deliver their weapons. And they were giving these slips like to kind of they can move in the next 3 months, but like it wasn't clear what's gonna come next after these steps. It was a like quite open, vague what's gonna happen. This has also come at the time where people start to see like quite prominent figure who are known among the Syrian to commit like grave violation and during the Assad period, and walking freely and like wandering in Damascus street. This somehow suggested that there was kind of a deal with them, but it wasn't clear. And like till today, we don't know if there was a deal or anything like that with them. And I think this allows somehow to some voices to come up asking for general amnesty like after that. So like if we have like those who committed the grave violation and like the figures of these kind of violation like wandering, so why not to give like then amnesty to others or like those who are in lower level. And I think this is definitely like invoke like lots of feeling of injustice and anger among like the big segment of the Syrian society, and somehow also like reinforce that there is this kind of group that asking for amnesty that as a group like somehow this is accompanied as well at the same time with like definitely a grave or very bad economical situation, and like at the same time the authorities start to lay off like a high number of people, like thousands of people from their jobs. Also this lay the ground that people felt more and more insecure, and like that there is more grievances coming up and surfacing, I guess. This is coincidence as well at the same time, like over time that we saw somehow the authority ignoring including people in the process about like this transitional phase and excluding them from being part of that phase without like a clear vision about it. So like this is, I mean, we can give example about this announcing victory, where like mainly was led by like the military faction, where like the Sharia was announced as the interim president. This other example could be also the national dialogue, where like, I mean, people were took few hours and people were criticizing it like harshly, but that people were rejected to be to participate based on being representative of groups, political or non-political groups, but like they were allowed to come as only representative of themselves as individual. And I think that also like show that this comes more as a kind of formal and cosmetic kind of a processes, which doesn't allow people somehow to be participant in transformative and participatory democratic process, or like allow them to kind of uh, tell about their vision in the country in general, but also what they want and what their demands in particular more. And again, like also there is a kind of a lack or like ignorance of like a lack and lack of a clear process of transitional justice at the same time. So like it wasn't possible till today, I think, to know like what kind of transitional justice we're looking at, or like what people can expect, at least, even giving signs. Like I'm not saying like laying off, like, because I know this is a very complex, definitely process to be done, but there was no signs where we are heading somehow. And especially we're talking about super polarized society in this stage. Knowing that, like Syrian over years, I mean, developed tens of organizations that were working on transitional justice. We're trying to put visions about what kind of paths we can look at. And this is definitely can't be happening without including like a huge segments of the Syrian society to be part of it. I mean, it can be just as a cosmetic, like, or I mean, process, like from time to time. Hala. When we start to also see violation, like incidents, what was called like halat fardiya, or like individual cases, also the authority didn't play like kind of a clear role in deterring that, like honestly, in like an serious attempt to deter that, except in cases where we start to see like cases where like went online virally, and that incidentally that the authority will start to respond to these incidents. It seems as if like other files or cases were giving the priority in that case. لا. Taking this into account that there is a widespread of weapon like all over the country, definitely we have thousands of what is called fulul today, or the former regime militia, who they know today, definitely they knew that they are in a predicament. They don't have, and they didn't want to give up to the reality that they don't have the power anymore, and they want to find kind of escape of this predicament they found themselves in. And definitely, I mean, one of the solutions is to drag the country to more conflict, because this is sustaining their position in that case. I mean, we saw that in their attempts to control some area, I mean, the desperate reliance on external forces as well. And then we had this, the incident, like, which kind of exploded the violence, the ambush against, like, the public security patrols. So, like, where, like, the public security patrols were attacked. And then, as a response to that, the authorities sent, like, reinforcement factions to one of, like, the villages in the Syrian coast. And definitely in these factions sent, like, I mean, there were like many who were like young men who were like, as far as we heard, like they were trained for a very short time, about 15 days, as we know. And they weren't like trained particularly on like dealing in an area with that sensitivity. We know like this is kind of, there are lots of sensitivity in these areas, taking into consideration the different sectarian background of the people. Additionally, as well, that there was this call for general mobilization, which followed, and there was no kind of clear decision to stop it, or like very direct decision to stop it. And lastly, as well, that there was no ability or like inability to control the factions, like many of them that include like foreign fighters, which definitely they are not there like to build Syria for all, I guess, but like they are more in a vision of like building Islamic State maybe, and they see maybe big segment of the Syrian society as infidels. I mean, they deserve that to be killed somehow. And we can't take all of that without also understanding that this is all accompanied and like coincidence with like huge like media mobilization, honestly, through like official and unofficial channels, through social media, huge disinformation. So there become like clear that there are, I mean, hundreds maybe of like accounts which were run from outside even the country. I mean, what I read like in different like reports that mainly Russia, Iran, but Israel as well, to kind of spread like fake news and to kind of invoke all of these like sectarian hatred between the different segment of the society. And this is also led that, I mean, the people in that sense, they don't have a kind of resources or like or places where they can get their information that they can trust somehow. And this is continuing till today, definitely. It's not like something that has stopped, like it is continuation. There is a floods of information to the degree Syrian don't have any kind of channel they can really trust and go to. Also, the authority doesn't offer that. We still like get our information, unfortunately, from Telegram channels or like official statement are spreaded and then like sometimes revoked, sometimes confirmed. So like in that sense, I mean, people will definitely, I mean, which is happening in different contexts, not only that, like in a polarized context, that people rely on like resources that usually confirm what like their biases. And this is what's happening. So, and they create these kind of generalization, they stop their critical thinking. And definitely, I mean, in that cases, many will believe that the Fulul or like the former militia were behind committing all of these incidents and the crimes, but also that those who are like were victims of the violation were like either from the Fulul somehow or like generalizing vision about like specific groups. So this is what like also like this kind of campaign can do.
Thank you very much. You already
I will
touched
just, yeah, I will just
many
add
points
just
that
Yeah, I will just add one, two words. Like, just we need to understand this, like, on the background of having lots of grievances among the Syrian society. I mean, among the Syrian society, but also fragmentation and loss of trust, which, like, the Assad regime invested in a lot. But I can talk about more.
yeah, you really present to us a whole range of very important issues, some of which we
Good.
definitely pick up later as well. The lack of transitional justice, accountability, and inability and unwillingness to deal with affairs, and also undermining from outside and from domestic hostile actors. So the entire situation in Syria is really terrible. Also, 90% of the population live under the poverty line. So plenty of things to talk about, but now, Lena Rutuk, I wanted to turn to you because you're from the city of Homs. And of course, the violence in the coastal areas was very prominent, but over the past years, basically, I also heard so much about the insecurity in Homs, Homs city, Homs province, kidnappings, etc. So maybe share with us more about what makes Homs so particular in the Syrian context.
Um, Thank you so much for having us and for organizing this discussion. I think I agree with you that Homs is extremely specific example when it comes to sectarian division, but also the type of violence that it experienced. Homs was from almost the first cities to arise after Daraa. The revolution was in the city itself, inside the city, not in the countryside. And from I remember personally, I saw the first protest in the almost 15 March, and in that day, in that week, on the Friday, Homses wanted to go to their city center to reach the main the clock square, and they couldn't because of the snipers and because of the regime oppression. From the first week, the feeling that the regime is residing in the Alawi areas and that the Alawi areas are attacking the Sunni areas started to emerge, at least in the neighborhood that I lived in, which is a Sunni neighborhood that was in front of Alawi neighborhoods. And I printed, it doesn't show, but I printed like a picture to explain that it's really, they are in front of each other, the neighborhoods. So protests happened in these neighborhoods like Khaldiye, Bayada, but also like Baba Amr and other areas. And in front of them were neighborhoods that protesters perceived as the source of violence. And it all started from there, and the division started. Yeah, even neighborhoods started to be very homogeneous. Alawis who used to live in Sunni areas moved to Alawi areas, and Sunnis who lived in Alawi areas moved to Sunni areas, and the sectarian division became bright. I want to say in probably 2 weeks after the start of the revolution. And from there, like a lot of initiatives happened, a lot of groups that are mixed amongst activists and amongst revolutionary actors tried to really stop this division. And for example, Alawi protests will come to protest in Sunni neighborhoods, but also kidnapping started very early on. There are a lot of course, like analysis and some evidences even that the regime was responsible for these kidnappings from both sides because they, as Lina said, the regime invests in sectarian divisions. However, at the end, people, what they see is that when they go to this neighborhood, they get kidnapped. So this feeling of fear started really from very early on. And this was followed on by a lot of violence targeting the Sunni neighborhoods, including destruction, bombing, siege, that continued for years, I want to say. And now when you walk in this street, which is like, this is my neighborhood, and when you walk on this street that divides the neighborhoods, this neighborhood is totally destructed. The residents of this neighborhood are displaced, while this neighborhood is, as can be seen physically, untouched. I want to say that there is a material, as I was discussing with Fadi, we were discussing with Fadi yesterday, and he mentioned there is a material evidence of the differences amongst the areas in the city. So I want to say that it's of course extremely particular, especially that people view that those who are responsible for their displacement and for the destruction of their areas are their neighbors, are the neighboring neighborhoods or areas. And we are seeing now, I want to say, like continuous, even after the fall of the regime, we saw that this division stated, and despite a lot of initiatives, like it's really like, I want to say, amazing how a lot of people are trying to do their best, forming civil peace groups, forming interactions between different neighborhoods, but it's still until now very visible, the differences between the neighborhoods. A lot of incidents of kidnapping that I would like to say it's not on sectarian basis, but when it's really most of those who are kidnapped are from Alawi background, and very rare to see that someone who is Sunni or Christian was kidnapped and then found dead in some hospital. I cannot say it's not a systematic sectarian kidnappings. We hope, because as Syrians we really don't want to say it's sectarian. We feel our heart broken when we say it, but at the end we cannot really deny the truth. And every day I speak with my Alawi and Sunni friends and family members in homes, and everyone is not comfortable. Everyone say that the Alawi areas are the areas that are not safe now, and that there is a lot of kidnapping. Now we ask the question of who is responsible for this. We don't know. We don't. Some people say that the general security and al is not the one doing the kidnappings, but others say that those militias that come to kidnap people pass through the checkpoints of the general security. No one was held accountable. We didn't see anyone who was really like a story that was published by the new government to say that this crime was committed in these circumstances by this person, and that justice will start. We didn't see any announcement of this sort. So people, of course, have a lot of doubts whether, like, are they going to be targeted always? When is this going to end? For example, in the last week, I didn't hear about incidents of kidnapping in my city, but it can happen anytime, because also in the beginning of the liberation, if I want to say, or the fall of the regime, the first days people fled. Alawi communities fled from their neighborhoods, and they came back because they felt safe, and they felt that there is no sectarian plan, like there is no like ethnic cleansing plan, or that those who the militias that are coming didn't commit in the first days crimes. However, like individual incidents started day after day, to a degree that it's not anymore individual. Many people argue, and here I want to say that these differences are also yani they have intersectional approach, that are they overlap. Many division overlap, not only sectarian. So the Sunni neighborhoods are also distracted. The people who are from their neighborhood, these neighborhoods, many of them had to displace to the northwestern Syria. Now I'm hearing a lot of also stories and also friends coming from Idlib and Aleppo to try to find a home after the fall of the regime in homes, and they cannot find home. Their homes are destroyed, and of course it's very expensive to rent. There is no the economic situation is extremely bad, to the degree that there is no specific for example support targeting those returnees. So for them the fall of the regime was a happy moment, was a very important change in their lives. Of course, they were very happy, but at the end, like, they are now still living in tents. They cannot come back to their neighborhoods, and when they come visit homes, they see that their neighborhood is destroyed, while who they may consider the perpetrator neighborhood is not touched. So it's very, I want to say, very visible. Even like also in the countryside, when incidents in specifically the western countryside in Hula, Qabu areas, when violations and happened like during the last 3 months, I expected it, because we know that those areas, even in my analysis 2 years ago with during my job, I highlighted this area as a very sensitive area because of past massacres. Because in this area also Hula massacre happened, and there is grievances between communities themselves, and they consider that the other person, the other neighborhood who is from a different sect is responsible for the massacres. And unfortunately, we didn't see until now the new government try to unpack these narratives, or try to really give a space to really discuss what happened before no, as Lina mentioned, like we didn't see any plan for transitional justice process. We know that it's a long process, that there is a lot of even like legitimacy questions about if this new government is the one that has the legitimacy to start the process. But we didn't see even promises for victims that there will be prosecutions, that there will be guarantees that these crimes will not occur again. And as Lina said, that victims are seeing perpetrators walking normally in the streets, in the villages. No one was held accountable from those who are responsible for crimes, while a lot of poor people, a lot of people who don't have high positions were kidnapped, we don't know by who, and found dead. So this is what I wanted to say. Also, I want to say that I believe we need to be careful of describing all of what's happening as a revenge-driven crimes, because many victims oppose this type of violence. Many victims don't accept to say that these killings are revenge killing or that it's connected to them. They detach themselves from it. So some criminals are just like doing these crimes for sectarian basis, for extremist thoughts, for also like to steal, because they are criminals. And as Lina said, there is no rule of law. Weapons are everywhere. It seems apparently that the campaigns of the state, the new like armed forces to take weapons targeted more areas of minorities and didn't take weapons from everyone equally. So there are a lot of groups that now have weapons. We don't know their relationship to the government. So it's really very, I want to say, Homs specifically is sensitive. And I want to say that I think peace in Homs means peace for Syria. I always say that if Homs is safe, the whole of safe from sectarian divisions, the whole of Syria is safe, given how complicated it is and how close communities are to each other. Yeah, thank you.
That is a very good phrase and something to be remembered and discussed further. Also, the point we also heard of many people who were really shocked by the violence and were saying, well, not in my name. So that is an element also that we find. And Fadi, let me come to you, because yesterday we also talked about Syrian society and divisions and how it has been over the past decades, but also looking back. I don't want to go too deep into history because today we would like to focus on what's happening today. But while there was Assad, there was also this idea, well, he's the protector of minorities, he's the guarantor of rights. How do you look at Syrian society in terms of living together, a coexistence, a shared space? What does impact this, and how can it be, like, what would positively influence that?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I think the different religious and ethnic groups in Syria have a long and complicated history of living together in this space. But one of the main problems is that we don't have a national identity fully achieved yet. Syria is still a modern state. The first idea of Syria came after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in 1990, when the first Syrian conference happened. Then it took us like 7 years later to get the independence from the French mandate. From 46, we had a very short period of national democratic rule until we had 54 years of dictatorship under the Assad. So since Assad took place, there hasn't been really a national dialogue about what makes this country have its own identity. If you come to the matter of facts, Syria was decided by the European powers after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. They just drew lines on the map. It happened that the northern border was drawn parallel to the train line, Levant train line. So they cut Aleppo from Gaziantep. So most of the nobilities of Aleppo were cut from their lands in Gaziantep and were impoverished by this. They divided Aleppo from Mosul in Iraq, and then Aleppo lost further on. At the period, even Aleppians had much more deeper relationships with inhabitants in Mosul than with Damascus. Damascus citizens had much more deeper relationships with Beirut than with Aleppo. So suddenly we had an artificial borders, a short period of national governance, national rule, and then a dictatorship that forbidden any kind of national dialogue. At the same time, we live in a region that is full of drama, political drama, wars, that incite sectarian feelings, sectarian violence. You had the war in Lebanon, the multiple wars actually in Lebanon. Lebanon has witnessed 2.5 civil wars across its history. In the last war that ended by the Syrian occupation and by an international mandate to Hafez Assad to enforce a solution in the 90s, it was perceived as the end of war came at the cost of the Christians. The Christians were the biggest loser of this settlement that ended with Ta'if. Then you had in 2003 the American occupation of Iraq, which resulted also in the migration of most of the Iraqis Christians who were targeted when the sectarian war between Shia and Sunni started. They were collateral damage. So Assad regime has well played over all of these incidents in the region to present itself as the only guarantor for the minorities in Syria, that he is the one who is holding things tight or holding the Pandora box in Syria closed, so people can live in peace together. Which wasn't true. Assad regimes used the minorities to protect itself, to establish its rule, to put people in front of each other. While if you go deeper in the analysis of how the Assad regime was built, it was built on a coalition of people from all religious and ethnic groups who had their interests guarded by the Assad regime. He had the officer who arrested my sister and tortured her was Christian. I am Christian myself, and he was also Christian. So he was using the Alawite slang to when he was torturing my sister. And this is a common practice because it meant power and meant being representative of the regime. So it is not as simple as to say that the Syrian regime was an Alawite regime that protected minorities. Not at all. When the regime fell, I was in Syria doing a big tour, finally after being forbidden from entering my country for 14 years. And in many Alawite villages, I saw this awareness among people that the Assad used them as and impoverished them over decades and decades to force their sons to serve in the state apparatus or the security apparatus. They are underdeveloped. These regions are underdeveloped. They are poor in purposely to make them in front of only one choice is to make their living, which is joining the security forces. At the same time, I think the tensions between the different religious groups in the region were always spiked by international intervention. And the massacres that happened in the 1860, and here I would say that when the Syrian uprising started and Christians were afraid, I don't justify their fear of the future. because, as I said, there was historical evidence of sectarian violence against them, whether in Lebanon or in Iraq. So in the 1860s, it is a massacre that is well maintained in the memory when at the same time Christians in Zahle in Lebanon, in the mouth of Lebanon, and Zahle in Damascus and Aleppo were attacked by the mobs. But if you go back, why this happened, it was actually the result of the conflict between the Ottoman Empire and the European powers who tried to impose themselves as guarantors and protectors of minorities in the Levant. Yani the French tried to present themselves as the protectors of the Greek Catholics, the Russians as the protector of the Greek Orthodox, the Austrian as the protectors of the Druze community. And when they force-handed the Ottoman Empire to make what is known now as the Tanzimat, which gave the Christians an equal status with Muslim citizens, some power centers in the Ottoman Empire weren't happy with this and moved the mobs in those different cities to attack the Christians, to send a message to the Europeans that you cannot force our hand like this. So, of course, minorities also, Christians in Mount Lebanon, also make their own political choices at the time. When the Muhammad Ali campaign came from Egypt to fight the Ottomans, they joined them. So at the same time, the massacre of the 60s were the revenge of the Ottoman Empire for their political position against them. So it is a complicated history we have, but you can always see that these kind of tensions between the components is always accompanied, at least if I'm not going to say provoked, by international struggle over the region and which international power wants to impose its forces. Today, I'm afraid after the massacre in the coast, we are seeing some similar patterns when when people are asking for international protection to the coast, and Russia is using this as a way to behind the scene to justify the presence of their military bases. So you cannot wonder whether these massacres also has been somehow a political game, in the middle of a political game that we won't understand until a few years later on.
But we definitely can understand from that how dangerous it is in the volatile situation that Syria finds itself in if external actors are there and offer protection or call for protection or intervention, right? Well, Fadi, you also mentioned one issue, and Lina Omran had touched upon that in her introduction as well, the national dialogue. And I know that you attended this national dialogue conference that was established on such a short term that many couldn't attend, and that I think was considered by pretty much everybody as like a show and nothing real. If we look at what would be needed or what would be desirable for Syrians, could you briefly describe what would you think would be a meaningful national dialogue? How should that look like?
I think we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Actually, the first Syrian conference that I spoken about in the 1919 took a whole year, where Syrians were talking to each other about what kind of state they want, what kind of relationship they need between the different components or the center and the peripheries of the country. And now more than ever, after having the biggest obstacle in front of any kind of national dialogue removed, which is the Assad regime, we need such a dialogue. The problem is, though, that what we are witnessing with the current de facto authority is that they are dealing with each of these issues as a box that they need ticking. The international community calls for national dialogue. Okay, we organize a national dialogue that takes place we invite people to before 48 hours. It takes place in 8 hours, and we call it a national dialogue. And until now, we haven't seen the report coming out of the actual talk that happened in the working groups. Although we were promised that there will be a report, a detailed report issued. I don't think a country that went out of 54 years of dictatorship and 14 years of civil war could achieve a national dialogue in 8 hours. You can fool yourself and the international community, who is just willing to accept anything in the name of bringing stability to Syria and the region, but you cannot fool the matter of fact that we need a dialogue between each other. We need to understand what kind of state we are going to establish here. The problem is, though, that the current authority is having a bunch of fanboys who I'm very sad to say it, from the Sunni majority, who are accepting anything because they see that now as they got back as Sunnis the rule of Syria, no one is allowed to criticize or highlight the miscomings of the current authorities. And this is not helping at all. We need to talk to each other, express our fears, express our hopes for the future, the kind of transition we want to say, the kind of participation. Currently, also the same applies for the political participation. And everyone was asking for a more inclusive government, so they just tick the box. One woman, and she happens to be a Christian at the same time. One from the Druze community, one from the representative from the Kurds, without even engaging with SDF to nominate a Kurdish minister. So that's it. This is how they understand political participation. And then we discovered that the Minister of Foreign Affairs is actually monopolizing all powers inside his ministry. So. And we call it a participatory government. This is, I don't know how this can build a country that is out of 14 years of civil war. This is just making a beautiful facade that in the hope that it will cover all the rotting inside. We actually have a rotting country that needs to be a surgeon to deal with all its problems, and this surgery should be happening through a national dialogue where everyone participates, where everyone has his input, all the political forces, all the ethnic and religious groups.
Right. And here we also come to another problem that is still on the table. Many legal experts have been looking into how a just constitution could look like. However, the one that was presented now does not fulfill many of the requirements. But yesterday, Lina Houtog, we also talked briefly about that. And you said, if I remember correctly, there should be a number of articles in the Constitution that guarantee everybody's rights, that guarantee minority rights, articles that cannot be changed by majority vote, but that are there forever. So they are a guarantee. Would you want to elaborate a bit more on that? How should that look like? And do you know of initiatives that have been working on particularly such an essential part?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that the problem is that, as Fadi said, the current institutional declaration that happened is bigger than an institutional declaration, and didn't happen in a participatory way. It was parachuted on us Syrians, and we even like groups that worked for years, and civil society actors, opposition groups that worked for years on the issue of constitution were not consulted. Their papers were not read, so it's just thrown, and we don't know like how it was built. However, what I want to say is that, of course, there are some articles that could be worrying, but these articles also existed in the previous constitution. Like, for example, that Islam is the source of jurisdictions of laws in Syria. So, okay, but what does that mean? We, during these 14 years, we saw that there are several interpretations of Islam. We saw that also the extremist radical groups killed in the name of this religion. And we saw that there is no like one defined meaning يعني amongst all Muslim and Islamist scholars or thinkers or even politicians. So it's what we need is really clarifications of what does that mean and clear statements that no laws will be issued that contradict human rights. And here I really insist on the issue of human rights and not minorities rights or specific group rights, because when now we will have a law that really discriminates, or a behavior that discriminate against Alawis, tomorrow we will have it against Christians, after tomorrow it will be against Sunnis who are not maybe religious enough, after it will be against political opponents. So it's really, I want to say it needs to start on the principle itself that protection of human rights, protection of diversity, of cultural freedoms, of like until now, despite like the history of Syria and disappearances, we don't have clear how can I want to say like commitment that enforced disappearances will not happen again. Although we are seeing that under the rule of the new government, we are seeing a lot of enforced disappearances and people don't know where are their loved ones. So this, what I believe that what people need to see in order to feel more comfortable is a clear statement from the state in the institutional declaration about the relationship between religion and state. They need to define it. What does it mean? For example, in my city of Homs, that the court palace is managed by a sheikh who didn't, like a religious leader, who didn't study law, who didn't study civil law, who is not a judge. He is only a sheikh. What does I understand as someone who should be protected by this legal system? Same apply to other cities. So we really need to know, like this new government need to explain to us what is really the relationship between religion and state, and on what basis they are going to make the laws and make a clear guarantees that it's going to respect human rights as generally, not only minority rights. Because I think that, as Fadi said, it's very provoking to pressure the current state to speak specifically about minority rights, because many people consider for 14 years for them the majority was being killed and no one was able to protect it. Why now we are speaking about minorities? So, and specifically when it comes from specifically if it's a Western pressure, it's even more create more anger. Also because we are in years that we really human rights thoughts or principle lost their legitimacy after all of what's happening in our world, all of the how can I say, like the foundational countries for human rights, the Western countries that supported now the genocide in Gaza. All of this really reduced the legitimacy of even the word human rights. So now I believe that pressure from Western countries, and specifically negative pressure or standoffish pressure, is not going to be helpful. What is helpful is really positive engagement and honest engagement and support for Syrians and for the new government to really solve this problem. We have several sects, we have several crimes in the past. We have in the constitution, for example, we have an article that is called criminalizing Assadism, like تجريم الأسدية, kind of as if it's copied from Germany, So, but for me, I would like to understand more, like what does it mean, and is it only the Assad? What the Assadism was a problem? Like, is it no mention? There was no mention about prosecution for criminals other than Assad. we see people in this new army who were from the extremist groups who are accused of human rights violations. Tomorrow we have a court in France that is going to prosecute one of the members of Islam army, and this same army has a power now and is part of the new army. So we really need like not only a constitution and talks and promises. We need really procedures that follow all these talks and processes and explain to us how our legal system is going to look like. And here I want to explain that people has a right to be afraid because we had a history not only with the Assad. Assad is the biggest perpetrator. We know Assad was the reason for most of the violence in Syria, even for the extremism in Syria. I want to say the violence of Assad pushed for the extremism of the revolution and for weaponizing the revolution and for even like the control of Islamists over the revolution. However, it was not the only perpetrator. Many people were kidnapped by the opposition groups. Many massacres happened, although they were not documented to the same degree as the massacres of the regime. But we know that in Adra al-Amaliyah, for example, in rural Damascus, tens of women and children were kidnapped to Douma, and by this same army that is now new, part of the new army, Jaish al-Islam, the Islam army, and they were kidnapped, they disappeared people. So really, we need guarantees that not only we are against the crimes of Assad, of course, not only that Assadism is a problem, but also that extremism is also a problem. Killing people because of their identities and is a problem. I don't use the word terrorism because I feel it's a little bit not very objective, but violations are a problem. This is what I want to say.
No, definitely, and really to address the issue that violence executed in Syria has been from a variety of groups, and that accountability would need to cover all of these crimes of the past, but also what's going on. That's a very essential point, and I think Lina Omran, you also touched upon that before. Lina Omran, I also wanted to ask you, what would be meaningful points? I see also some questions relating to that in the Q&A. What would be meaningful ways of supporting justice and supporting civil peace in Syria from the outside? And what would you say? I mean, Lina Hotuk touched upon the constitution. I know that civil society has been very active also right after the massacres to have declarations of solidarity. What would you say, like briefly, from the civil society in Syria? What are good approaches and what would be meaningful ways to support these from the outside?
Yeah. I mean, we have, actually what saved actually the people in the past few days, actually, after the massacre and help in like reducing that somehow is like the civil society network that start to emerge even locally, like, I mean, from people in there, but also from like from other who were established before, honestly, because there was almost no efforts to support like the victims of these violations. I mean, not only that, like in some area, like people were prevented to reach this area, and journalists were reached for a while until like the operation end and like things start to develop. But till today, like people are super afraid, and we don't have that much of. But like, what I want to say also, I mean, this is more on local level, honestly, happening today, because we need to take into account that, I mean, most of like the civil society is also like overloaded over years also, like they are in today and before, I mean, overloaded and responded to respond to like needs inside the country, but also for those, for instance, in the diaspora, also like managing their life, taking care of their family, taking care of emotionally and financially by these kind of networks. And I think it's like it's a country like really where like the whole economy is in collapse. We don't see like any kind of ways like today's how to revive that. I mean, or attempts that gonna show any kind of revival in that direction. I mean, mainly, I think lot what can be done, like, and we start to see a bit of that, but it's still too little. I mean, Fadi knows much. I mean, what they do. I mean, I think like Bisma and Zaytuni are from the few example what they do in the coast, but also in different areas, trying to connect different areas together. There are networks are trying, like one of them is called Wasl, was trying lately also to gather like members of different sects, conveying or going to different areas to consolidate people, trying to build the bridges, which is amazing, definitely. But this is too little, like with the like completely exhausted society on different level. And I think like the need is like to support these networks. I mean, to support also like, I mean, overcoming all of these cleavages we have. Like we don't have only the sectarian cleavages, and like we need to give attention to that. We have like cleavages and like conflict lines on different level in among the Syrian. I mean, you have like this kind of tension between till today those who are outside and inside, between different neighborhoods, between those in the cities and those in the rural side, between those who like they witnessed their places destroyed, and those who their places were intact, those who were displaced, those who are not. This is really huge. Like, I mean, one thing I just want to emphasize that we also can't and won't be able like to throw everything also on the civil society, because I see also overemphasis of the role of civil society, which is true that they can do like a big role, but also there is overloading of them as if they can solve the problem, which can't be solved in that. Like this is very structural, like there is a responsibility for those in authority also like to move things in some directions, to be able for like civil society also to act. So honestly, also there is a need like from outside to support these networks. I mean, we see like that even in a Brussels conference, I mean, this year, like I think what was pledged even less than what happened like last year. I mean, even on a money level, if we're gonna talk, but like also support of like people to move. Like, I mean, we can take more like on that, like people are not able to move. I mean, Fadi is able to move, but like other people who worked, for instance, in diaspora and are trying or willing to move and trying to, they can't because of their like, I mean, legal status in some countries. And because of the limitation also, like the financial limitation, but also like on different level. So I think, yeah, I mean, this can be done on kind of from outside somehow.
Fadi, did you want to add? Because Elena just mentioned that Basma and Zaytouni might be one of the organizations working on bringing different backgrounds, people together. Please elaborate on that.
Yes, actually, I think we are lucky that we inside the organization we share the vision that we needed to be across lines, across border organizations since the beginning. For years, we were trying to, despite all obstacles, to work not only in neighboring countries, in Lebanon, where we started, but also inside Syria, because we believed that one moment these lines between the different regions will fall, and we will need to be prepared to work across these regions. And this is what is happening right now. And I'm very proud that our staff who are in Idlib are the ones who are preparing and sending the aid to the coast. We are members of the Wasl network, who is trying to bring people from different areas to meet each other, talk about what happened in the last 14 years. We have a lot of challenges, Bente. I mean, whenever we meet people in Syria, each has their own story and their own suffering of the last 14 years. And when we bring people from different areas together to listen to each other's, it becomes a lot easier to reach this common understanding of what is needed for the future, how we move on forward. And this should have been the role of the de facto authority. This should have been the role of the national dialogue, not just theatrical act in front of cameras to say we had our national dialogue and give us money. In Idlib, the people we met said they had their own grievances. They saw that everyone in the regime area was okay with the way they were bombarded and killed in the last 14 years. They were just cornered in one corner of the country, 4 million, 5 million of people who were forced to evacuate from different areas of Syria and then shelled day and night. Also in Homs, for instance, we had a very interesting open discussion that was hosted by the Jesuit fathers in Homs, where we had three panelists who spoke just for 10 minutes each, and then for 3 hours people were talking and exchanging, talking about their grievances, about their suffering during the war from different neighborhoods, as Lina mentioned. And the Alawites were feeling the pain of having to endure the constant campaigns of to search for weapons, how the government is entering their houses, homes, and sometimes insulting them, the insult on the checkpoints. At the same time, the Sunnis who from the neighborhood who were besieged for a few years in Homs were talking about their suffering during these years and how the checkpoint of the Assad army at the time was confiscating food and making them starve for months. So when you listen to each other, you discover that your suffering wasn't unique. And a lot of people across the country had their own suffering in different ways, in different versions. It is true that even the people in Damascus, who in the center of Damascus, who weren't, who didn't suffer from the shelling or the besiegement, but they suffered also from huge level of impoverishment. We met a lot of people who were before the uprising among the upper middle class, and now they are really poor. They can't afford the daily necessities, and for them this is a huge suffering they are dealing with on a daily basis, that they cannot bring to their children what any normal kid would want. So
Yeah, I think
what
yeah, like what you describe also is the effect of the country having been divided because people could not travel from one area to the other. So I think it is also that many couldn't see how the others are living and what is affecting the others, right?
Yeah, in Idlib, we saw a mom who told us that after the regime fell, the first
Nadia, I can't hear you. Maybe something is wrong with your audio.
is this better now?
I can hear you.
Yes. So in Idlib, we met with a mother who said that the first thing she wanted to do after the fall of the regime was to go to Latakia to see the sea. And when on the road, when the landscape was changing to more green side, her kids were asking her, "Mom, are we still in Syria? Is this Syria?" And when they saw the sea for the first time in their life, and they they couldn't believe that this is the same country, because they were cornered in Idlib for 5 or 6 years and haven't seen anything beyond that. So people need so much to go out and meet each other, talk to each other, and unfortunately, the massacre in the coast came as just stopped a lot of these efforts, and put a halt on this. But this is the real national dialogue we need.
Well, unfortunately, we are already approaching the end of our session, but I have a question that is referring to something. It is a question from the audience regarding media, because one of you said that there are no really trustable media. Most communication is taking place via Telegram. Well, I think there are good efforts and good publications such as Jumhuriyة maybe, or Ena Baladi. There is also the very important website Verify SY for verification of things that are circulating. But what do you think? Is there anything that can be done to improve the media landscape? Because disinformation is a conflict driver. Disinformation is not just a rumor circulating, it is really endangering lives. So maybe, I don't know, Lina Omran, would you want to go to answer that? Or would you all want to share something about that?
Yeah, I think we need to push the government to relaunch the public TV and use official channels to announce their decree. Currently, the most difficult thing is to verify whether a decree is a real decree from the government or a falsified document circulating online. You cannot find any single source where you can verify this thing, and a lot of energy and time and disputes over social media are happening while no one has an answer, which is this true or not? Also, I think we need to push the donors community towards more funding for independent media. Unfortunately, in the last few years, we have seen that a lot of the alternative media that were established with the beginning of the uprising were closed because of lack of funding. And today is also we are going through a very sensitive period of Syria as a future, and we still need independent media and more of it. Yeah, I mean, currently you have two or three outlets only still operating out of whatever ever started at the beginning of the uprising. Because we still need a critical eye to what the government is doing, what we need to keep monitoring as a civil society, what is happening, and focus on the mishap and all the wrong steps taken.
Lina Omran or Lina Rotuk, would you want to add something?
I mean, I don't think I can add much more than what Fadi said, but I can just emphasize more and more that the need of like official channel actually for people like to go back to and like to verify, like as he said, like if even statements or like decisions were for real or not, because till today like we keep seeing these statements coming up with all like the official stamps and everything that, and sometimes like they are revoked, sometimes they are confirmed, and like so people are lost, and this is I think the main source actually of this confusion. I mean, other than like we have so many levels that we have this vagueness, like we don't have a clear kind of vision about how things is going on. We don't have a real channel to confirm if this is like official channel for the government, or if it's just like was made up of someone else. And I mean, additionally, definitely there is a need of support for other media channel, I think, because like, I mean, the amount of like, or the floods of fake news, I mean, doesn't have equal kind of balance by like few outlets who are trying to do like really like trying to do as much as possible, but also like they can't carry all of that burden, I guess, as well.
Yeah, indeed. I think it is really difficult, and that would be a good point to support further. I have one last question also coming from the audience that is referring to the external interference, because with Turkey and with Israel, we have two parties that keep bombarding Syria. It is a very military kind of incursion we see here, and also the continued and advancing occupation of the Golan Heights. How should the Syrian government react to this is a question from the audience, because I think it is a difficult line to toe. It is an extra challenge on all the ones that you just mentioned. Is any of you willing to answer what would be good ways how to react to that, and what would be good ways for the external community to support Syrian interests here?
I can probably here contribute to the discussion is that the new government really is seeking legitimacy and seeking doing efforts, I want to say, to take their space in the international community. However, until now, like we saw some, because at the end, like we are a world ruled by superpowers. We have the veto, we have big countries controlling even our main international organizations. So for example, what we saw is only, let's say, demand from the US that the foreign fighters should be removed or like expelled out of Syria. We, I don't know what does that mean. Like how we can expect people that fought together to really insult each other in this way. And here I'm not saying that I am agreeing with the presence of foreign fighters. Yesterday I was speaking with a friend in the coast area, and I was speaking specifically about foreign fighters, and she said that of course she is afraid much more from foreign fighters than the Syrians, because at the end with Syrians they can communicate, they have some history together, but with foreign fighters, like, they have just one ideology that they came for, an Islamist jihad. So, but this at the same time, like this government is in a position that they need to balance their politics with the international community and their politics with some of their partners, I want to say, in are yani, partners within the armed groups that caused the fall of the regime. Because at the end, this was not a political transition; it was a military. By force, it changed. So, and how the new government need to behave, I think that the new government need to really follow the principles of sovereignty and really insist that Syria is a sovereign state, to really be very clear about specifically international law principles, that any occupation should be condemned. I don't know, like, whether Syrians will be able to resist in any other way aside from really trying to like demand support from the international community, the Security Council, to really stop the violations, and specifically from the Israelis, but also like with Turkey, it's a little bit more complicated, since like the new government has a good relationship with Turkey, so they need to really agree on the presence of the Turkish presence in Syria. But here I want to say that also the international community should also like really how can I say, be accountable to international law, and that what is occupation is occupation, what is aggression is aggression. When Israel come and bomb all military bases in Syria, this is an aggression, and they should be held accountable. So this is my answer.
You very much. Since all of you have been referring to accountability and transparency, first of all, because I think transparency is also something that we are lacking, that we're missing, because when crimes happen, I think it is not clear what happens to those who committed them, whether they're arrested, for how long they're arrested, what kind of procedures are happening, and who should be the courts to judge them, and who are the legislators. So many things that are hovering over justice efforts. Maybe for your final words, would you have a short statement, each of you, what could be done to support these efforts? What should we ask for, or what should the West maybe also support and give to Syria to enable these efforts, or how to pressure also the new Syrian government on these efforts? Fadi, what would be your advice?
I think political pressure on the government should remain in terms of accountability and transitional justice, and also participation. But also at the same time, Syria needs to revival to its economy. Without economic recovery, all of the problem will keep intensifying in the coming future. يعني the poverty and the struggle on resources will intensify. The situation right now is really drastic. يعني I've spent in the last 4 months, I spent 2 months in Syria, and each time I go there, I see that poverty is increasing, especially out of Damascus. يعني Damascus is a bubble that doesn't resemble anything else in Syria. If you go to the eastern part of the country, to Deir ez-Zor, for instance, it has regressed in time 80 years in terms of development. يعني a lot of resources need to be flowing to the country, and any revival of the economy and would help pushing forwards on all other dossiers.
Thank you, Fadi. Lina Rutuk, what would be your take?
Yeah, here I honestly would like to stress on the issue of sanctions is that sanction is really becoming not anymore acceptable. I want to say is that it's really harming any potential for Syria to really start its new future. It's really like a big burden, and even things that are not the result of sanctions, it's very easy to blame everything on sanctions. And I believe that there is now a big agreement among Syrians from different backgrounds, from different attitude toward the new government, is that sanctions, specifically sectorial sanctions, should be removed without conditions because they are a real obstacle for rule of law in Syria, for peace in Syria, for really funding for Syria, for even us Syrians to invest in our countries. So I think that although it's a very also I want to say like a negative pressure and the colonial way of thinking about like we keep the sanctions. It's I think it's a very problematic. It was problematic before, and even now it's worse and worse the sanctions. So I believe that there is a need of a lot of pressure to on European countries who have a say in sanctions to remove sanctions because and to listen to specialists, to listen to economists, to listen to civil society actors, to listen to us Syrians when we are saying that if sanctions are meant to protect us, they are not protecting us. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
Thank you. Lina Omran, you already unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, I definitely agree with what both Fadi and Lina Rutuk said. I mean, I'm definitely in agreement as well of like lifting the sanction, but I just want to make a final comments about that because I think also this overemphasized as if it's itself is gonna solve the country's problem I mean, all even economically. And I definitely see like we need to lift this sanction, but it's not gonna by itself like just solve the issue without like a pressure on participatory and like democratic process where people also engage in and decide. We could see easily like I mean we had example of other country where like even when sanctions were left like if there is no process to do that and now people like you're gonna see reproduction of re-centralization of power and like limiting in a smaller circle, world law can re-benefit from that. So we can't ask only for lifting the sanction before like also asking like together and to be interlinked to like pressure on like making this process participatory and like democratic.
Thank you so much. So many really important points, but I think one thing that is clear is the relationship between justice, economic well-being, or the absence of such, and the tensions that the tensions that we're witnessing have a sectarian component. It's clear, but it is a very political one, and it is one that also can be influenced by many other factors. I think it's huge tasks still ahead for Syria. I'm very grateful for all your insights and also learning about how civil society efforts have already helped to really make the situation smoother than it would otherwise be. And I'm very impressed by that because it is obviously something where the burden on civil society is huge. But I think we see also how well it is for Syrian society that all of these efforts are there. There are unfortunately some questions that have not yet been tackled, but I think there will be other occasions. And I'm very grateful for you taking the time to be with us, Lina Omran, Lina Rutuk, and Fadi Haliso. It was excellent to talk to you. And for all of those who are interested in following up on their questions or other topics, I think you'll be able to find yourself online. Thank you very much. And we are looking forward to further occasions to see what the future holds for Syria.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.